Nina rides a horse while Azure watches her from a distance. He comments that Nina learns quickly when she doesn't overthink things. After dismounting, Nina cheerfully remarks that horse riding is a lot of fun and that she already wants to do it again. However, her tone suddenly shifts to a more serious one as she asks if he was saying something bad about her. Azure immediately acknowledges her sharp hearing, but warns her that she can't keep riding because something dangerous might happen. Nina wonders if he's referring to the incident from the other day. She also suspects that the man they encountered earlier was likely one of the queen's subordinates and had attacked them, thinking Azure was an imposter. Azure, however, brushes it off and tells her to forget the whole thing. Realizing that Didas is no longer around and that they are now alone, Nina starts behaving a bit oddly, but all she really wants is for Azure to call her by her name, Nina. Nina then notices something in his hands and asks about it. One of the maids explains that they are fita ribbons, which are currently fashionable among the ladies of the court. These ribbons are traditional amulets from the southern lands, woven with wishes or prayers, though most ladies weave them for the men they love. When Nina recalls Azure's face, she becomes flustered. She quickly tries to shake off the thought, reminding herself that she's soon to be married, but this only makes her feel more conflicted and ends up leaving her even more distressed. Later, the two of them go out riding. Noticing that the reins on Nina's horse are worn, Azure decides they should ride together, explaining that she isn't quite ready to ride on her own yet. Nina, clearly nervous, feels embarrassed as Azure urges her to come a little closer. When they reach a cliff, Nina is awestruck by the stunning view, able to see all the way to the horizon. She spots a red house in the distance and asks what it is. Azure tells her that it's the royal family's villa, where the former king resides. That man, Azure's great-grandfather, laid the foundation for the country's prosperity and is, in many ways, more significant than the current king. Azure adds that he lived with him from the age of 4, and over the next 10 years, his great-grandfather taught him many things. While there were times Azure resented him, he also holds great admiration for him. Nina realizes this is the first time Azure has spoken about himself, and it's clear his great-grandfather meant a lot to him. Now she begins to wonder what Azure thinks of her. Confused, Nina isn't sure how she truly feels about him. After finishing her fita ribbon, Nina goes to find Azure and overhears him talking about the worn reins on his horse. She immediately grows concerned. It seems like things are getting worse each day, and if this continues, even Didas might not be able to protect him. Perhaps they should inform the former king. But Azure dismisses the idea, saying he hopes nothing will happen. Still, he knows that if it's for the good of the country and the will of the people, his elimination will be inevitable. After all, it is the fate dictated by the star under which he was born. Nina, who has heard everything, storms into the room in a rage. She tells Azure that she hates the idea of being tied to the fate of a star. Upset that Azure seems to think it's acceptable for people to want to take her life. If she knows she's in danger, she should do something about it. Azure, however, calmly replies that if she were to lose her life, she would accept it, as her life is worth far less than Nina imagines. Shocked and unable to comprehend what she's hearing, Nina wonders why Azure is so willing to put up with this and for what purpose. Azure then tells Nina not to worry about matters that don't concern her, and to focus on fulfilling her own role. Furious, Nina throws the ribbon at her and tells Azure not to use her name when they're not alone. She then storms out of the room. On her way back, still muttering curses under her breath, Nina is intercepted by the king, who seems somewhat worried. He asks her if it's true that she left the festival early because she wasn't feeling well. Nina briefly considers telling him about Azure, but knowing that the queen is involved, she decides to remain silent. She wonders if anyone has the power to help Azure and begins to feel desperate. Determined to find a solution, Nina hurriedly grabs a horse, intending to see the former king. Still inexperienced in riding, however, she falls off but quickly recovers. Apologizing to the horse, she promises not to scare it again and manages to make her way to the former king's villa. Upon her arrival, the former king is surprised to see her arrive without requesting an audience. Nina introduces herself as Alicia and, with great respect, makes a request to spare Prince Azure's life. She tells him about the events of the festival night, the horse's reins, and her suspicion that the queen is behind it all, likely seeking to seize the throne. The former king asks if Azure asked her to speak, but Nina assures him that he hasn't, that he's acting on his own. The former king, who already suspected this, comments that Azure always had a gift. When he taught her one thing, Azure learned 10. He grew up to become one of the pillars of the nation. In other words, if Azure hasn't decided to act, it's because he believes it's for the best. Nina, still uneasy, asks if the former king wants Azure dead. Instead of answering, he beckons Nina over. Realizing that she's not really Alicia, he orders her arrest, stating that anyone who grew up in Star Village would never set foot in the star emblem. He orders everything she's carrying to be confiscated and that she's thrown into the dungeon. Later, Phonum reports to the former king on Nina's situation. To their surprise, she's not crying like they expected. Instead, she's humming to herself. Back in the dungeon, Nina comments that she thought it would be a scary place, but it actually reminds her a lot of home. However, that's not her goal right now. What matters is making sure Azure forgives everyone else because she was the one who made the mistake. Plus, she still needs to convince them to protect Azure. To do that, she decides she needs to improve the king's opinion of her, so she quickly begins clearing out the dungeon. Hearing this, the former king orders her to be scared a bit. Phonum approaches Nina and informs her that she'll be getting 100 lashes the next day. Instead of panicking, though, Nina simply thinks they're being generous. At least she's not going to be beheaded. The next day, Nina stands before the king again, fully aware that this may be her last chance to convince him. The first thing she says, even before apologizing, is that he must protect Prince Azure. She promises to accept any punishment necessary in exchange for him sparing the others, as they are good people. The king asks why she wants to sacrifice herself for them, especially since they used her in the end. But Nina responds that they gave her a place in this world, and when you live with someone, they become your family. The former king, visibly pleased, remarks that he no longer has the power to stop the queen. Furthermore, his legs are now rotting from poison, which will slowly spread to his heart and end his life. However, though he cannot do anything, Alicia can, as she is in a position of great power. It turns out that the one who agreed to her engagement with Galgada is his grandson, the current king. This is a grave mistake, because Galgada is only looking for an excuse to invade Forna, despite their good relations. That's why they asked for something as impossible as the betrothal of the priestess princess. If Forna refused, they would attack, using the broken engagement as an excuse. Even if Nina were to go through with the marriage, they would still find a way to blame her for something and invade anyway. Nina thinks that what she's doing doesn't make any sense, but the former king tells her that normally she'd be right. However, if Alicia has courage and determination, she will be able to protect Azure. Nina doesn't understand what he means, so she asks him to explain, but he tells her to figure it out for herself, because if she continues being a fool, she won't be able to protect anyone. At that moment, Azure appears. The king tells Azure that this girl came to ask him to save his life, but Azure responds that it was all his idea, so she is not at fault. The king remains calm and tells Azure that he and his 2 guards are the only ones who know what happened, so there won't be any issues. He asks them to calm down and rest there for the night, and that the next day they will return together. The former king mentions that he hasn't felt this good in a long time. Azure and Nina leave, while the king notices Didas's presence and quickly calls him over. He remarks that this imposter girl is a very peculiar element and will likely become the wind that drives Azure forward. Later, Nina and Azure are looking up at the sky. Azure mentions that from there, they can see the Western Lands, a place very dear to him. Nina notices that he doesn't sound angry, just tired, and wonders if he was worried about her. She then apologizes and quickly tells Azure that he and his great-grandfather have the same eyes. She had always found it strange that he didn't resemble the king, but now she can see that he resembles his great-grandfather. Azure reveals that he doesn't have royal blood. Just like her, he is an imposter, a stand-in for a deceased prince. He was switched with the prince when he was a child, and only the king, the former king, and a few others know about it. Not even the queen, who comes from another country, knows. A small flashback shows how the former king took care of Azure, raising him in his villa from a young age. From that point on, Azure devoted himself to the country, giving up on wanting anything for himself, as he was destined to live his life that way. We see him grow up to the birth of the other prince, making it clear that he was never to want anything for himself, as his only purpose was to serve as an advisor to the king. Therefore, it would not have been strange if, after Muhulim was born, he had been eliminated. Here, Azure reveals that the real reason for finding a replacement for Alicia was to get rid of him, whether the replacement was male or female. As long as they had the same eyes, they would perish before Galgada could discover them. This was the best way to prevent Galgada from finding an excuse to have the replacement die due to his negligence. However, Nina turned out not to be just a pawn, as the day before, Azure couldn't stop thinking about what he would do if something happened to her. He couldn't bear to lose her smile through tears, as she is one of a kind, and he would never let her die. Nina tells him that he shouldn't die either, as it is insane for him to think he deserves it just because he is not the true prince. Even if Muhulim becomes king, Azure could still support the country. Azure replies that it could cause a lot of discord, even if that is not his intention. If others wished for it, it could lead to serious conflict. Nina refuses to accept this and tells him that if he were to leave, there would be no one to call her by her name, so she doesn't want anyone else to. If he doesn't, then it means nothing. She doesn't care that he isn't a prince, because to her at least, he is one of a kind. At this, Azure stares at Nina and recites the following: "A blue like the dawn, and the one whom those eyes look upon so honestly is not the prince or anyone else." Never before in his life had he wanted something for himself, and suddenly, he takes her in his arms and on impulse decides to kiss her. After what happened, he says that it was just a dream, so he takes Nina to his room. However, she, full of joy, knows that it was not just a dream. If you've reached this point in the video, don't forget to leave the word exquisito in the comments. Thank you very much, and see you in the next video.